Don't you think, Thomas went on to say with a resurgence of intensity in his voice, that the real fighter must remain within the world to deal with everyday mundane life rather than look after his own well-being in order to gain eternal bliss? Nowhere in the Holy Bible have I heard Christ speak about monasticism. He wanted human beings to struggle within the world, to look after each other, to love one another. Don't you find it egotistical to lock oneself up in a monastery with the sole aim of saving one's own soul? Please make a note that I do not mean to put you down, Father Maximus replied, implying that Thomas was misreading and misinterpreting the gospel. Don't worry about that, Thomas reassured him. Both men were eager for an open discussion on these issues. It was fascinating to see them be so frank. First of all, the way that you read and interpret the gospel is not the way that the holy elders interpreted it. The gospel is very clear about this issue. Father Maximus went on to say, let me give you an example. Do you recall the incident when that young man went to Christ and asked him, Lord, what must I do to save my soul? And Jesus replied, sell everything you have and join me. In another part, we hear Christ say, nobody can be my disciple if he loves his mother or his father or his daughter or his fields more than me. And he gave the first injunction, love thy Lord thy God with all thy soul and with all thy heart. That is, love God with your entire being. Just think of the 12 apostles. They were ordinary people that he picked from ordinary life, but they gave up everything in order to follow and live with him. Thomas says, yes, but Christ lived in the world. He did not lock himself into a monastery. Let me ask you something, Thomas, Father Maximus replied. How many years did Christ live in the world? 33 years, right? And how many did he preach? Almost 3. Right. Of the 33 years, he preached for only about 2.5. What was he doing the previous 30 or so years? Well, there's the apocryphal life of Jesus that we don't know much about, Thomas replied. That means, Father Maximus went on to say, that for 30 years, Christ maintained a life of silence. He neither preached nor did he do anything noticeable. The most holy Mother of God, the Panagia, the holiest human being that has ever existed and could ever exist on the face of the earth, never did anything that we can pinpoint. Did she ever preach? Did she ever create any welfare institutions? The only thing that we know is that the Panagia was in the temple praying and worshiping God. Then she was given her special assignment. Why was she chosen to give birth to the Christ? Certainly not because she was a great missionary, but because she was perfectly holy. Do you remember what Christ said to the apostles after his resurrection? Go and sit in Jerusalem, quietly doing nothing, and wait until the Holy Spirit comes to you. It came on the Pentecost. It was only after their enlightenment, through the descent of the Holy Spirit, that they were instructed to go into the world as healers and teachers. Christ showed them the way. He shows us that we are not to get on the road and become self-appointed missionaries. His example indicates that we must wait in silence and obscurity and focus our hearts and minds exclusively on our personal relationship with God. It is in this way that if and when we are called by God to go out into the world for a particular task, then we will be ready for it. Also keep in mind, Thomas, that the apostles lived communally. They gave up everything that connected them to the material world because of their exclusive preoccupation with God. They owned nothing individually. They lived celibate lives and were totally obedient to their master and teacher. This is exactly what we do in the monastery. So really, the roots and foundations of monasticism began right from the inception of Christianity by Christ himself, through his life with the apostles.